Welcome to today's lecture. So we will be discussing tail bounds in today's lecture. So the agenda for the lecture is that we will start with the Markov inequality. Then we will discuss the Chebyshev inequality. Then we will do law of large numbers. I'm sure most of you would have seen the law of large numbers. And the fourth point on which we will be spending most of the time in today's lecture is the master tail bounds theorem. Okay, so this is the agenda for today's lecture. In fact, I mean the lecture will be heavy in notations and all the things that we will be doing. But whatever concepts we are discussing, they are mostly elementary. We are not using any sophisticated techniques, so it's more or less like from first principles. So we'll start with Markov inequality. Okay, so we just take an example. Suppose we flip a fair coin n times. Okay, and we are interested in the probability that we get at least alpha n proportion of heads. Okay, so where we can say that alpha is something like this. Okay, so what is the probability that we will get? So the standard way of doing this is that if a head comes, we define a Bernoulli random variable. So if a head comes, we assign that random variable 1. If it's a tail, then we assign it as 0. And the sum of all those random variables is what we call x, which is the number of heads in n flips. Okay, so what we are interested in is the probability that x is greater than alpha n. Okay, so this is our quantity of interest. Okay, the thing with all these bounds and other stuff is that there is a lot of material out there, but unless we know what we want to do with the bounds or what quantity that we want to bound and other stuff, it after a point it becomes very heavy. Heavy in the sense that we are just doing maths for the sake of it. So for this purpose, we will introduce an indicator variable. There are many ways of proving this. We can do it using integrals as well, but I like this method more. So an indicator variable is a 0, 1 variable which gives a 1 when x is greater than or equal to alpha n, and it says 0, it gives a 0 otherwise. Okay, so basically this function indicates if the value of x is greater than or equal to alpha n or not. That is why its name is an indicator variable or an indicator function. Okay, an interesting property of any indicator function or an indicator variable is that its expected value is just the probability. Okay, so I think this expression is clear. So since The second term, it goes to 0. We are left with probability of x greater than or equal to alpha n. So the expected value is just the property. And the final step in deriving the Markov inequality or Markov bound, it uses this observation. Okay, so how this equation works is that if you look at it on the side, now if x is greater than or equal to alpha 1, alpha n, then that inequality it reduces to alpha n less than or equal to x, which is obviously true because that was the if condition. Now if x is less than alpha n, then the indicator variable gives a 0. Okay, because the indicator variable gives a 0, we have 0 greater than or equal to x. Alright. So for this inequality or whatever analysis we are doing, x should be a non-negative random variable, which at least in our coin toss case is true. But it is important to remember that Markov inequality, it applies only for non-negative random variables. So once we have understood this equation, all we have to do is take expectation on both sides. What we get is and as we saw previously, the expected value of the indicator variable is just the probability. So what we have is probability that x is greater than or equal to alpha n is less than or equal to expected value of x divided by alpha times n. Okay. So this inequality we derived from the context of the example, the coin toss example that we have taken. But in general, the Markov inequality looks something like this. Okay. So this is our Markov inequality. It is a very popular inequality and it is used as a basis of several other derivations. So for the coin toss example, suppose if we have alpha is equal to 3 by 4. That means we are interested to know what is the probability that we get that 3/4, that at least 75% of the tosses they result in heads, then we will have something of this kind. So since this is a Bernoulli of n and everything is independent and the other stuff you can check, then the expected value is n by 2. So what we get is this bound. Okay, so expected value of x is n by 2. Since it's a fair coin, we are doing n many independent tosses. So this is what we get. One thing to notice with this particular bound is that the upper bound, it does not depend on n. All right. So irrespective of whether we are doing 100 tosses or 1000 tosses or 1 million tosses, the probability that we will get more than 75% of them as heads is upper bounded by a constant 2 by 3 for this term. We will next see the Chebyshev inequality, which gives a bit more insight into what is happening, at least in that coin toss, in this coin toss example. Okay, so our next is the Chebyshev inequality. Okay, so for this purpose, we define another random variable which is nothing but deviation of x from mean. So we are sort of moving towards the second moment or the variance term. Then what we have is that We were interested in this bound because we need positive quantities for applying Markov. We'll just square on both sides. And then now, since the left hand side is also a positive quantity, we can apply the Markov bound. And what we get is this by c square, which is variance of x by c square. Okay, so this is our Chebyshev bound. Okay, so it is less than or equal to the probability that modulus of x minus expected value of x is greater than or equal to c is less than or equal to variance divided by c square. One thing to notice here is that this bound gives us so this is a bound on the total of two tails, because the random variable x can be less than expected value of x, and it can also be greater than expected value of x. So this bound is the sum of two tails. But if we are just interested in one side, then we normally use the same bound. Okay, we will use the same bound, but we realize that it will not be as tight. But on the other hand, if we know that the distribution is symmetric, then we can do more. We can maybe half the bound, because we know half lies to the left and half lies to the right of the expected value. Now uh, for the coin tossing example, coming back to our coin tossing example, again we are interested in this alpha is 3 by 4. So if you have to apply the Chebyshev bound from first principles, we can do it in this way. Since expected value of x is n by 2, then if we apply the Chebyshev bound, we basically get variance of x divided by n by 4 square. Now if you substitute the value for variance of x, you can check that this comes out to be 2 by n. So it is sharper than Markov, as we can already see. And one observation here is that it tends to zero as we increase the number of tosses. Okay, so it tends to zero as we increase the number of tosses. That means x tends to be more towards the true mean. So this is one observation which we get from this, and this is the basis of what we will discuss next, which is the law of large numbers. So law of large numbers, basically it says that if we have independent samples of random variable x, let's say independent and identically distributed, of random variable x with mean mu, then we can define Sn, or let's say xn is x1 plus x2 plus xn. This is the sum of random variables. Uh, then if we have to bound the average, the sample average, that will be xn by n minus mu is the true average, IID from, let's say, a random variable x. So this x is different than the x that we were discussing in the Markov and Chebyshev with mean mu, and the probability that it is greater than or equal to epsilon we can directly use the Chebyshev inequality now. So we will get, okay, let us not use xn. Sorry for the confusion. Sn by n, and we will have epsilon square. Now this is variance of Sn by n square epsilon square. Since these are IIDs and identically distributed, we can write this as variance of x by n multiplied by epsilon square. Okay, so we already know that as n tends to infinity, and if we have variance of x is finite, then this quantity it tends to 0. Okay, so we say that sample mean converges in probability to the true mean. So there are several types of convergences. Mean square convergence, almost surely convergence in distribution, convergence in probability. If you know them, it's good. If you do not know, it's okay. We do not need those notions in our course. So what we have here is basically like a definition of convergence in probability. So we say that the sample mean converges in probability to the true mean. If you look at some more literature, this is actually called as weak law of large numbers. When we have almost sure convergence, we call it strong law, but we'll just call it as law of large numbers because this is not a course on a probability. Another thing to note is that for our proof, we assume that variance of x is finite, but finite variance is not a necessary condition. Okay, it is not necessary for the law of large numbers to hold. The convergence will be slower if the variance is not finite, and the proof is more involved. We need to use characteristic equation and Taylor series and all those things. If you're interested, you can look it up in any textbook on probability. But finite variance is not necessary. Okay, so we are done with the first three items pretty quickly: Markov, Chebyshev, and law of large numbers. If you have to summarize, so what did Markov tell us? Markov inequality basically tells us that the probability that the random variable x is greater than or equal to a is less than expected value of x divided by a. Chebyshev x is greater than x minus expected value of x is greater than or equal to a is less than variance of x divided by a square. Now, so here the bound falls off as 1 by a. Okay, so if we increase a, then the bound falls off as 1 by a. Here in Chebyshev, it falls off as 1 by a square. Okay, so what we are interested in is higher moments, at least for the purpose of this lecture. We are interested in higher moments where we will be doing something like this. So if x is a random variable, I use small x here. Then like we squared in Chebyshev, we will do x raised to the power r. So r has to be an even number if we have to apply the Markov inequality because we need a positive integer. Then we can use Markov and get something like this. Okay, so here it falls off as 1 by a to the r. So as we increase r, the bound falls off very quickly. But for this to work out, we need to evaluate the bound on either evaluate exactly or evaluate the bound on xr on the expected value of x raised to the power r, which is not a very straightforward thing to do, but we can bound it when x, or what we will be discussing in what follows is that we will have a nice bound when x is a sum of independent random variables with finite variance. Okay, this has several practical applications as well. So if we consume, if we assume xi to be uh, the number of items that customer I purchases, then x is the total number of, then their sum x will be total number of items that we have sold. This is just one example. So, so when we are considering a sum of independent random variables and its bounds, what directly comes to our mind is the central limit theorem. I hope you have heard of it. So what it says is that if we have sum of n IIDs with mean mu, then this particular quantity, it converges in distribution to the normal as n tends to infinity. On the other hand, if we assume that they are zero mean, then what we can say is that this converges to normal. I mean, just because the expression looks nicer, and that is why we assume zero bound. But this bound, we can also say loosely that the tails of x by root n, where x is sum of xi's, that they are bounded by the normal. Okay, so the tails are bounded by the normal in limit. So when we have x, when we have n tends to infinity, that we have, but what we are interested in is the bound for all n. Okay, given a value of n, can we bound the tail of the random variable? So for this, the whole idea behind the master tail bound theorem. Okay, so this is the objective of the master tail bound theorem. So I will not write down the tail bound theorem. I mean, in full detail, look, you can look it up because the statement is very long. I do not want to waste time on that. But just, okay, so I'll maybe write it briefly. So what it says is that the probability so this is the first statement, and then the second statement is sigma square. Okay, so we'll see how to get these things, but first we will look at the assumptions for the master tailbone theorem. It is important to realize what the assumptions are. The first assumption is that xi's are independent. Okay, So we are not assuming that they're identically distributed as well, but we need them to be independent. Through the course of the proof, we will look at how each of these assumptions help in getting a bound or help in simplifying the proof. We also assume that they are zero mean for all I. Then the third assumption that we make is that their variance is bounded. Okay, they need not have the same variance, but their variance is upper bounded by sigma square. Then the fourth key assumption that we have is that the absolute value of xi to the r is bounded by r factorial and then the variance. Okay, so this bound is not really arbitrary. It might seem that it is arbitrary, but if we expand, if we consider the exponential series, if we consider the exponential series, then the rth term is, if we consider the exponential series of e to the x, then the rth term is x raised to the power r divided by r factorial. Okay, so there is some relation to the exponential series expansion. The comparison is relevant because if you look at the traditional proof of what we know as Chernoff bound, then in the traditional proof we evaluate the characteristic function, the moment generating function e raised to the power something, then we expand it and do all those things. So this is not a completely arbitrary bound. We will see how it simplifies whatever we are going to do. So the whole proof, the proof will have three steps. I'll just change the ink. So the proof will have three steps. So the first step is that we will evaluate a bound on this, on the expected value of x raised to the power r. Then our second step will be to use Markov inequality. Then our third step will be to optimize the bound. Okay. So the first expression that we have, if we optimize it for the value of s, then we will get the second expression. So after the first two steps, we will end up with the result number one. And after the third step, we will get the result number two. The proof is quite tedious, it is lengthy, but it does not use any sophisticated techniques. Okay, it does not use any sophisticated techniques. It is sort of hard work, but easy to follow. So the first step is that we want to evaluate, before taking the expectation, we want to evaluate x raised to the power r. And for that, we can use the multinomial expansion. So x raised to the power r is xn raised to the power r, and this is r choose r1 r2 rn, and we have x1 raised to the power r1, x2 raised to the power r2, and xn raised to the power rn for various values of r1 to rn. So they non-negative integers, so ri are greater than equal to 0 and summation ri is equal to r. See, these are the two conditions for multinomial theorem. This is just simple multinomial theorem. So we can simplify this expression to be r1 to rn. We have r factorial, r1 factorial, r2 factorial, rn factorial, and x1 r1, x2 r2, and xn rn. Okay. So this is x raised to the power r. Next, because we are interested in e expectation of x to the r, next, because we are interested in the expectation of x to the r, we take expectation on both sides. And our first assumption comes into play here. The first assumption that we made, that xi's are independent. when xi's are independent, the expectation of the product is the product of expectation. Since they are independent, we can write it like this. Okay. So this expression looks very complicated. Then to simplify this, we will use the next assumption. The next as the uh, okay. So one thing here is that if we have not made use of the second assumption yet. So if this will be R1, this will be R2. Now if any Ri equal to 1, then by assumption we have that xi Ri equal to 0. So of these so many terms that we have, we don't have to worry about those terms for which Ri is equal to 1, because it will make the whole expression equal to 0. So therefore we assume that Ri is, it belongs to this set. So without loss of generality, we assume that it belongs to this set. So we have used our second assumption also. Next, we will use the fourth assumption, where we say that the modulus of the expected value of xi to the r is bounded by r factorial sigma square. So that is why we need sigma finite, because we need a finite bound. So we have sort of used third and fourth both. So when we substitute it here, then we will have r1 factorial sigma square, r2 factorial sigma square, and rn factorial sigma square. Okay, so this is what we assume. So all the r1 factorials, they will get cancelled out, and we are left with this term r factorial r1 to rn sigma is to the power 2 into number of non-zero ri's. Okay, so if ri is equal to 0, actually we do not need to use this bound. The bound that we have from expression 4, if any of the ri is equal to 0, its value is 1. The expected value of that is 1. So we only consider the number of non-zero ri's in this term. Okay, so this is the bound that we have right now. So each term, when we open this sum, each term of this sum will have a particular choice of r1, r2, r3, r4 till rn. Okay, now the first thing that we are interested in is that how many uh, non-zero ri's can be there in them. Okay, so let us assume that since we have n terms and each non-zero should be at least 2. So let us suppose we have Rn plus R2 plus Rn is equal to R. So each of them, if all are non-zero, then their minimum value is 2. Okay. So we have a bound that n should be less than or equal to R by 2. Okay. So yeah, this is sort of one bound, but what we say is that this is a crude way of saying, but what we say that in, so we have at most r by 2 non-zero ri's. All right, so we can have at most r by 2 non-zero ri's, So each term in the expansion will have a set of Ri's which are non-zero. Okay. So let us just consider one particular term in the expansion, and uh, suppose there are t many non-zero Ri's in that particular term that we have chosen. Okay, so there are t many non-zero Ri's. All right. So when we have t many non-zeros Ri for that term, without worrying about the index, let us say that we have R1, R2, and RT. Let us assume that they are R1, R2, and RT, and we have to distribute R. We have to distribute the power R to these R1, R2, and RT. Okay. So as a first step, what we do is that we give them one each. Okay. So when we give them one each, we are left with R minus T, because there were T of them and we gave away T to them already. We are left with R minus T. Now we have a combinatorial problem, and that combinatorial problem can be stated as follows. Distribute R minus T to T items such that each item receives at least one. Okay. Why do we need that each item receives at least one in the second step? Because only then we have already given it one. So 1 plus 1 will become 2. And we saw that if it is non-zero, it has to be at least 2. That is why we consider that none of the distributions should be 0. It must be at least 1. Okay. So this is a very standard combinatorial problem where which is called the stars and bars. I don't know if you remember, but we'll just recall it. Suppose if we have n balls which we want to place in m boxes. So what we'll do is that corresponding to n balls, we will create n stars. Okay. So for let us just consider an example. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So we have n is equal to 8, and let's just say that we have 4 boxes. So the problem of distributing these 8 balls in that 4 boxes such that no box empty. Okay, such that no box is empty boils down to partitioning this set. For example, if we place one bar here, one bar here, and one bar here. So these 2 stars, they go in box 1. These 4, they go in box 2. This goes to box 3, and this goes to box 4. Okay. So we cannot place a bar outside because none of the boxes should be empty. All right. So the problem is that we have if we have n stars, then we have n minus 1 slots in between. And out of those n minus 1 slots, we have to pick any m minus 1. Okay, so these are the number of ways in which we can distribute the balls in the boxes. So the balls are uh, indistinguishable. So these are the number of ways. Okay. So coming back to our problem, you can read more about this on Wikipedia also. Wikipedia itself has a page on stars and bars. So coming back to our problem, we had R minus T and we wanted to distribute it to T. Okay, so we had r minus t items and t boxes. Let's just call it balls and t boxes. So the number of ways of doing it is r minus t minus 1, choose t minus 1, where we have used this formula. Okay, so this is the number of ways in which, uh, given a choice of t, how can we distribute the power? Okay, so this is the number of ways for doing it, but there are n choose t many ways of picking that t. Okay, we can pick, let's say if t is equal to 2, we can have r1, r2, we can have r3, r4, r2, r4. There are so many ways. So for a fixed t, there are n choose t many ways, but since we are considering all possible ways, t can go from 1 to r by 2. Okay, so this will be the power, and we have the r factorial to complete the whole expression. Okay, so we had this particular expression where sigma raised to the power 2 number of non-zero arrays. So number of non-zero arrays, let us suppose the number of non-zero arrays is t, and how many ways can we have uh, t? How many ways can we have number of non-zero arrays to be equal to t? That will be the coefficient of sigma raised to the power 2t, and that is what we have found. Okay, so this becomes, so we have reached this point. So if you look at the book, they call this function as f of t. So what we have here is e x raised to the power r is less than or equal to t is equal to 1 to r by 2 f of t. Okay. Next, in the next operation, we want to bound this. We want to further bound this because it still looks ugly. We will use the basic combinatorics to bound these things. The first is that n choose t. So n choose t is n minus 1, n minus t plus 1 divided by t factorial. Okay. So we can bound it by using n raised to the power t by t factorial. Okay, this is fine. Then the next bound that we choose is, so this term r minus t minus 1 choose t minus 1, this is bounded by 2 raised to the power r minus t minus 1. Why this is true? This is true because 2 raised to the power something, it gives us all possible ways. Okay, k is equal to 0 to 1 is equal to 2 raised to the power n, if you recall. So from that, in fact, not just for t minus 1, for any value that is less than or is equal to r minus t minus 1, this is upper bounded. So when we upper bound it, we get something like this. So n choose t is n raised to the power t, t factorial. This will become 2 raised to the power r minus t minus 1, and we have sigma 2t. We can write it more nicely in sigma square t, t factorial 2 raised to the power r minus t minus 1, r factorial t is equal to 1 to r by 2. Okay, so we have reached this point. Now we denote this function by h of t, just because it is easier to write. And we note that I mean, the next step we are doing, because we will expand it to R by, when we open the sum, we want to take something outside the bracket, and then bound that sum that we have found by expanding. So for that bounding, we analyze this ratio. So this will be n sigma square t by t factorial r minus t minus 1 divided by n sigma square t minus 1 by t minus 1 factorial 2 raised to the power r minus t plus 1 minus 1. Okay, so if you solve these, a lot of the things will get cancelled out, and we will be left with n sigma square by 2t. Okay, like this will get cancelled. Here we will have t, and here we will have 2. So we have n sigma square by 2t. Okay, now we use yet another assumption which we did not mention in the first four. Let us suppose that this we already saw. Okay, because we want to do it nicely, we just suppose this. So what it means is that initially we were interested in expected value of x to the r. Okay, so what this means is that we are saying that r will be less than or equal to n sigma square by 2. So this way we have made an assumption on the x to the r of the x to the r that we want to find out. Now, if we substitute here, they substitute the value of t here, we find that this is greater than or equal to 2. Okay, so from t we got we use the bound on r to bound t, and this is what we get here. Now coming back to our expression, t is equal to 1 to r by 2, we had h of t. Okay, now we where h of t was defined as follows. Now what we do is that first we can expand it from h1 h2 h3 till hr by 2. Then we will take hr by 2 outside the sum, and we will make the resulting finite sum to be an infinite sum. So what we mean here is that we do as follows. Okay, so we first expanded the finite sum. We took hr by 2, which is the largest term, outside, and then we converted the finite sum into an infinite sum, and the upper bound still holds. The sum of this becomes an infinite sum of a geometric progression. So the bound that we get here is r fact 2 r factorial h of r by 2, where 2 is the sum of this infinite term. Now when we substitute the value of r by 2, what we get is r factorial n sigma square r by 2 to r by 2. Okay, so this is the expression that we get. 2 r by, sorry, we have 2 r by 2. Okay, this is what we get. So this finishes the first part of our proof. First part in the sense that we have found a nice bound on expected value of x to the r. Next, in the second part, we will use the Markov inequality. Okay, so we'll use it this way. Where if you see, this term comes from here. So this is the bound on the expected value of x to the r, and the a to the r is just the Markov inequality. We can further simplify this inequality and make it look nicer. And we can do it by observing that r factorial by r by 2 factorial is bounded by r raised to the power r by 2. If you expand this, the numerator we will have r, r minus 1, and so on. Okay, and r by 2 factorial will and r by 2 factorial. So they will get cancelled, and what we are left with is r raised to the power r by 2. So once we do it, we get a very nice, I mean, not very nice, a compact expression. Okay, so this is what we get. Now the final step. So here we have accomplished the first agenda that we had. So this we have done. Then in the last step of this whole of the master tail bounds theorem is to optimize R. Okay, we want to make this bound as tight as possible. So we want to optimize the R. So when we say optimize R, we want to find R to minimize the right hand side. So for that purpose, we will just use a simple calculus. Let's say that there is, can just use a of x is cx x by 2. We want to minimize with respect to r. Okay, so this is what we have taken, sort of, where our c is 2n sigma square by alpha square anything. So when we differentiate, we'll just use calculus, and when we differentiate, we will get 1 by 2. Okay, so since this is power, the first step is to find take natural log on both sides, and when we differentiate it, we get okay, and when we equate it to 0, what we will get is that the x that minimizes, you can check, is 1 upon EC. Okay, so for our case, we have C is equal to 2n sigma square by a square. So our R is a square to e n sigma square. Okay, but we want R to be an even integer. So we can use a simpler expression. We can take 2e to be equal to 6. So we will get a square 6n sigma square. Okay, so R is the largest even integer less than a square by 6n sigma square. Okay, this is fine. So next we will substitute the value of R in two steps. First, when we substitute R is equal to A square 2E n sigma square, here what we will be left with is just an E inverse on the term inside. Okay, so when we substitute it there, what uh, our bound that we get is that probability that x is greater than or equal to a is less than or equal to e raised to the power minus r by 2. Okay, but another, this is not quite correct because we want the largest even integer. So the largest even integer uh, can at most be 2 away. Okay, it can at most be 2 smaller than a square by 6 and sigma square. So when we do minus 2, it becomes plus 2 divided by 2 is 1. So what we are left with is e dot e raised to the power minus r by 2. Okay, so this is what we are left with. And when we substitute, we can consider, just to make it look nice, we can consider it as 3. And then when we substitute the value of r there, we will get a square 12n sigma square, where we have approximated 4e by 12. So this is the master Taylor-Jones theorem. You can look at the proof in the textbook. Uh, in the FODS textbook, it is given in the appendix. If you have any confusions, yeah. So you can look it up, and that will be all for this lecture.